Hi, everyone. Hello and welcome, friends. You have arrived at the first session in our summer fiction book club series. Today, we will be discussing Northwoods by Pulitzer Prize finalist Daniel Mason. I know some familiar faces in there, but if I don't know you, my name is Madeline Bujo-Hart, and my pronouns are she, her. I serve as newly appointed program associate of the BTS Center, and I'm so happy to welcome you. Thank you. I'm glad to be joined today too by our program director, Nicole Diroff, as well as our guest conversationalist, Maggid David Arfa. Most of you probably know this, but the BTS Center is the organizational successor to the Bangor Theological Seminary. We're located in Portland, Maine, on lands long stewarded by the Wabanaki, the people of the dawn. We seek to catalyze spiritual imagination with enduring wisdom for transformative faith leadership and are focused on spiritual leadership for a climate-changed world. I'd like to extend a special welcome to all of you gathering live today, as well as a warm hello to those of you who will be watching this recording. At this point, I'd like to invite you to put your digital name tags on, indicating how you'd like to be known in this space, and say hello to your fellow summer fiction book club readers in the chat. And we'll do this with a few question prompts. My first being, where are you logging in from today? Okay, here we go. Bobby from Latrobe. I was just in Latrobe, Bobby. I should have come to see you. And Bobby. Wiscasset, great. A couple Mainers. Falmouth, nice. Oh my gosh. Well, keep them coming. And the next question, as you check in from wherever you're checking in from, is what character or storyline, and of which there were many, in Northwoods was particularly intriguing for you? And I'll take a few moments to put that in the chat. Robert, yeah. Maybe which ghost? The twin. Those axe-wielding twins. Yeah. Yeah, Nora, the painter and the author. Apples as a character. I love it. I love it. Keep popping that in the chat. There is no rush. My third and final question, which is a bit of a logistical question, because I'll pop you into breakout rooms depending on how you answer this.
Okay. Yeah.
How far did you get in reading Northwoods? Are you finished with the book? Did you almost finish the book? Like me, who has 15 pages left, and Nicole told me the ending because I asked her to. I know, like ripping off the Band-Aid. Are you almost finished, or are you hoping to read it in the near future? All of the above are great. Just pop it in the chat so I know who to group you with. That would be fab. Thank you. So I invite you all to continue sharing responses to all three of these questions, and especially how far you made it in the book. And I'll be aiming to put you in breakout groups in a little bit. And thank you so much for showing up to this virtual space, for choosing to spend time with us on this particular day with this particular group of people discussing Northwoods. And with that, I'm going to kick it off to Nicole.
Hello, everyone. So glad to be with you to talk about Northwoods today. Thank you, Madeline, for that welcome. And hello to all you bookworms. We're so glad to create a space to share with you. My name is Nicole Diroff, pronouns she and her. I serve as program director at the BTS Center. As we begin our time together, I encourage you to find a comfortable position, perhaps light a candle, or do something you might do when you gather with a book club. So I have my favorite pink water bottle. I have a journal for taking notes. So whatever makes you feel like you're in a book club, do that in terms of your space. The Summer Fiction Book Club for the BTS Center is based on our belief that good stories do something that's desperately needed right now. They present realities and imagine possible futures. Fiction can serve as a window through which we come upon compelling and creative visions of social, ecological, political, and economic possibilities. Through a good story, voices of the marginalized or forgotten get to speak their truth. They also can give witness to the global experiences shared by humans and other than humans, some of those who are most affected by climate change. Because we are living in a time of profound spiritual and ecological crisis, the multi-species world needs spiritual practitioners and leaders who understand that a just transformation is possible when better stories are told and received. As Madeline shared, this month we have been reading The Imaginative Tale of North Woods, written by the Pulitzer Prize finalist Daniel Mason. North Woods, as you may have experienced, is a sweeping novel about a single place and a single house in the woods of Western Massachusetts, told through the lives of those who inhabit it across the centuries, following the cycles of history, nature, and even language. North Woods shows the myriad magical ways in which we're connected to our environment, to history, to one another. And there's a little bit of Beatle sex in the middle of it too. It is not just an unforgettable novel about secrets and destinies, but a way of looking at the world that asks the timeless question, how do we live on even after we are gone? Before we begin, let's just do a quick review of how our gathering will work today. In the first segment, we'll hear from our guest, David, about the insights and impacts of North Woods on him. Then we'll pull you into breakout groups and provide some discussion prompts for you to engage with in your small group. If you are someone who has not quite finished the book or maybe hasn't even started it, the hope is that we put you in a small group with others so that you can have similar conversations. After breakouts, we'll come back to the full group and you'll have an opportunity to pose your questions and wonderings and themes that really intrigued you. And then David and I will continue in some conversation before we wrap up at 1:15 Eastern Time. So at this point, I am excited to introduce our guest conversationalist, David Arfa. David works full-time for Bay State Hospice, where he coordinates their bereavement services and provides grief counseling. He retrained as a spiritual counselor nearly 10 years ago and has served as a chaplain in community hospitals, behavioral health hospitals, and elder care facilities. He completed 4 units of CPE with concentrations in trauma-informed care, addiction and spirituality, spiritual care at the end of life, theology and personal narrative, and grief care. From all of that, you may have a sense of why I wanted to talk to him about this book. David is also a storyteller and an educator who is rooted in Judaism's storytelling heritage and ancient environmental wisdom. He has helped renew the role of, see, now I was pronouncing this wrong. David, tell me, how do you say it right?
Maggid with a hard G. Maggid.
Renewed the role of Maggid, which is Hebrew for storyteller. He's renewing that role within the Jewish community. He has performed and taught in schools, libraries, fields, festivals, places of worship, national conferences, and forests. I love, love, love imagining you as a storyteller in fields and forests. Over the years, he has worked as a synagogue, school principal, Hillel program director, classroom science teacher, and nature center educator. He is currently volunteering as co-director of the Jewish Storytelling Coalition, where he is honored to help steward Jewish stories and their storytellers. I got to know David a year ago when we gathered for convocation with the BTS Center, and then some interfaith conversations that followed. And thank you, David, for saying yes to joining us for this conversation, which I think I think part of why I asked you is because you live sort of in the place that is imagined in this book. So please, David, please share with us what you found in this story.
Thank you so much for this invitation. I'm so glad to be here to share about this story. And yes, I live exactly where this story takes place in Western Massachusetts, town right next to Greenfield, in fact, which they mentioned Greenfield, which that George Carter's family was there or spent time there. Many of the towns are just fictitious names, Oakfield, but this region, of Western Mass. And I'm so excited to be able to share about the story because I loved this story. And I'll take about like 10 minutes or so, a little less, just to share some reflections of what came up for me, about this story. I mean, I just felt like reading it, it was such a treasure chest of a surprise on every page. It's like, where is it going? I love the characters. I love the feel of the almanac, where there were songs, almanac pages, pictures, footnotes. Oh, such footnotes. One that went for 3 pages. That was so much richness. And so I love that. I was so with this story. And actually I think it would be a great movie too. So if any movie producers are out there, I mean, it's right. It starts off, not only does it have like passion, violence, love, mental illness, seances, ghosts, all connected to one place. Like, how remarkable of a story to weave all of that together. And it starts with a chase, right? Right from the beginning, on the edge of my seat. It's dangerous, but not fully, right? Because there's this protective, lush greenery. And they get to hide amongst it and be protected and even steal a kiss while they're being chased. So it's not that full. And then the dog finds them. And, in any story, that's the worst of the worst. Like, the game's up as soon as the dog finds you. But here, what happens? Like, there's a knowing glance. The ear's like, I see you. So kind of a nod and a wink says, we got you covered. And it's like, And after 7 days, they could rest, right? And find this place. And he goes, gets a river stone, a foundation stone, and we're off and running on this truly, remarkable story. And so, Nicole shared with me an interview with Daniel that I heard last night, this beautiful 30-minute interview. And of course, it reorganized many things I wanted to say. But I also want to say, well, you know what? It's our story now, that every story, half of it is the author or the storyteller. The other half is how it lives in our hearts, in our imaginations. And we get the story and we get to talk about it and share our reflections. So for me, I want to just begin at the very beginning with the epigram at the very beginning. The first quote, which he has, to build a fire on Ararat with the remnants of the ark. It's from Nathaniel Hawthorne, from his American Notebooks, which I don't know the context of it. But I just right away, it's like, oh my gosh, the power of that quote for me. Like, so Ararat, that's the mountain the ark lands on. Okay, so it's after the flood. And then what is the ark? The ark is this container that saves all of non-swimming life in the face of utter, global catastrophe, right? Global flood. And what's this man do, or this person? Builds a fire with the wood. And I don't know, like, maybe they're in dire need, but I don't think so. It's like how important this story is, that of what the wood represents, that we need to bring into the future. But so often, it feels like that's America today, right? It just gets burned up. The past is burned. And so we don't have it anymore. And I just feel like the land around us, the lack of understanding of ecological connections, there's so much burning that's happened. And then that wisdom is lost forever. So how wonderful then to have this story that opens up the depth of place. And differently than other stories, like a couple other stories that came to mind that focus on one place, where there's three of them that I've read. Ceremonial Time by an Audubon editor that also takes place right on Route 2 and 495, actually. But it's much drier. It's not like the passions of people's lives, like this story. It really brings me in. It's more of a text even, And then there's a book called The Source from James Michener about one place in Jerusalem or somewhere in Palestine, Israel, and just going back to the earliest archaeological remains and showing really the Jewish life over the ages in that one place. But the place itself is, yes, it's there, but as far as the natural world, not really a character at all. And the last one is this book called Bloodlands that takes a place in Ukraine and Belarus and Poland. And there's a historian who just looked, it's very intense, nonfiction of all the killing that happened there under Stalin, under Hitler, and just chronicles it. It's just a chronicle of it. And so all of those are different approaches to place. And they all have relevance. But here in our beloved North Woods, it's like it's people's stories, that their passions that were brought into and get to then follow throughout their lives and throughout the generations. How unique that the place, it's the home, which they get a lot to talk about, but it's, of course, the land around them. And it's the orchard itself. What he's doing for me is he's reminding us that we need to bring the past forward with us. We need to know where we are. We need to know that there's a history in our lives, not just the forward looking, right? In America, we're so good at that, forward looking. But what's the past? And especially, what are the life support systems we need? Which I don't think he goes into so much, but it just raises that there is a past and there's a context that our lives, as central as they are in this book, they're actually one small piece of all the life that's happening here all the time. And so I just love that. I love that his approach to the Bible as well, that there's always, so the Hebrew word for ark, and I don't know many Hebrew words, but I happen to know this one, is teva, which is also one of the words for the word for word itself. And the rabbis in their insight really share that words are like arcs, and from words are stories, and that they are like arcs in our lives for us to keep present and to bring to life in our own ways, to have them nurture us as well, that they're still living that way, and we can be in relationship with them. And I love that. A quick story, right? The foundation stone that's built, and the rabbis, there are many stories in Jewish tradition. How much time do I have? Let me do a time check.
So either we could start talking in 2 or 3 minutes, or if you want to tell a story that takes 5, that would be okay.
Okay, so I'm going to save it, the actual story piece, though. Thank you. But because I really want to mention briefly how the name of the apple is Wonder. That's so significant. And I won't read it. It's page 41 for those that want to know. Going through that list, not only is the language so beautifully old-timey, of how the voice is portrayed for us, but he finally finds what he was searching for. He says, what's the name that would satisfy me? And he wonders, is this my pomomania? Which is the mental illness, because Daniel Mason's a psychiatrist, right? There's this rich, right, imagery of what it was, what might have been like back then, what it is now. And he says, what could satisfy me? After what, for which name? For a fruit is a thing with a capital T, while that which I was searching for was nothing less than that which could transcend the tangible, speak to astonishment, invoke not only pleasure, but the perception of something vast, supernal, nothing less than enchantment itself. And he felt, oh, my greatest eloquence, I finally propounded to my little audience, his two young daughters, who just said, you mean wonder? They both asked at once. That is so beautiful and significant, because it is our relationship to wonder, after all, that is so central in many of our lives, and how easy to lose our sense of wonder, and how important it is to be in touch with our sense of wonder. For me, this came to major significance when at first I thought, is environmental education just being transplanted into religious life, or is it authentic? And then I found the theologian Abraham Joshua Heschel writing after the Holocaust, his first books in the early 1950s, begin all with wonder, chapters on wonder. And he says that the world will not be destroyed from lack of information, right? But from lack of wonder. Can we generate the appreciation for the world and hold that? That is what's most important. When I read that, it's like, oh my gosh, that's what many of us revolve our lives around. Certainly with kids' experiences in the natural world. So I'm so glad. I wanted to highlight that because it's being really important. And just to say super quick about all the quotes, the Bible quotes at the beginning, that first story of the woman who's escaping, right, who's been kidnapped. And they had a whole series, there are 5 quotes, but just to say, it illustrates how the Bible is for all of us, no matter what situation we're in. And it shows that great diversity inherent in the biblical text, and I would say any story, right? We can bring it, and it's an example of how it maps with our own lives, our own imaginations, with what we need. People need to share what they love, and then we hear what we need, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I mean, I guess just as a final comment, as someone who identifies as a storyteller, and I love that you're part of a tradition that, you know, you may be reclaiming this role, but the Jewish tradition, the storyteller is an honored role. You know, just to reflect on the need for stories in these times in particular. Yeah, we do this thing called the fiction book club, you know, at the BTS Center. So I just, yeah, any comments from you on the why that matters?
Mm-hmm. You said it so eloquently. It feeds our spiritual imagination. It gives new frameworks. It's a way, there's a bounty hunter in here. And he taught me that lying is part of this world. I spent so many years in shock. Why would anyone do that? Yeah. You know, when I see political leaders just ignoring the health of a community. And I would say, why? Don't they know? Maybe you need more information. That's what. No, they know perfectly well. And they're lying. And they're using their greed, their power. Like, those are other forces. And I feel like we've forgotten that in America. My own learning of Eastern Europe, you know, in the Soviet world and Ukraine, like the sense of just paying someone to show up at a protest to either cause violence or to cause, you know, that's a thing that people in power do intentionally. And it's like, I'm so naive so much of the time. I don't even think about that. And I feel this bounty hunter, you know, like, oh yeah, he's just lying to everybody, pretending who he is to get his, you know, this person, thank goodness. Like, again, the ghost story. Oh my gosh. No, she's our guest. You may not take her.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Dave.
yeah.
Okay, so I hope some of what David shared gave you a few things to consider as we now are going to move you into small groups for discussion. Madeline has been preparing these groups of 4 or 5-ish, based, as you know, on what you shared in terms of how much you've read of the book. So we're going to put a few prompts into the chat that we invite you to reflect on as you gather. So first, I'm going to pop this other piece into Madeline. So I'm going to pop in the first piece. So when you're in your small group, I'm inviting you to think about the person who most recently celebrated their birthday as your gentle facilitator, just to help keep track of time and make sure that everyone in the group has an opportunity to share. And then make sure you have a moment just to briefly introduce yourselves. Most likely you don't know the people in your small group, because this is kind of a one-off gathering of those of us who read this book. So let people know who you are. And then we have a few questions for you. One is around thinking about time and how time functions as a character in this story. The other is thinking about the natural world, and in many ways, the natural world becomes a character, or many parts of the natural world become characters. One of the things that Daniel Mason says in the podcast interview that I shared in the chat that I had shared with David prior, is that so often in his writing, or really until this book, the natural world was always the setting. And he used to love, writing about the setting. That was always like a important part of his stories. But for this book, he decided he wanted the natural world to be more than a setting. So this is an invitation to talk in your group about when you saw the natural world functioning in its own agency. And then this next question is, just to go into, gosh, the entwined roles, fear, uncertainty, hauntings, violence, love. There was so much in this book. So wherever you want to go with all of those themes. And finally, if you have time before we come back together, maybe you even start with this question in your group. Your facilitator gets to decide, but what is the nugget of truth that you'll carry forward having read this piece? I think that's a pretty provocative question for this particular book. So I'm sure your small group mates would be interested to know what you're leaving with. So we'll be bringing you back together between 12:50, 12:55, so that you have a good 25 minutes of conversation, and that's Eastern time zone times. But we'll send a warning or two around before we just sweep you back in, and enjoy your conversations. Welcome back to those of you watching the recording. Everyone's going to be zoomed in here in 3, 2, 1. Hello, everyone.
Hi.
Welcome back.
We need to mute again, I guess, right?
It'd be good to mute again. Sorry if we swept you away from your small group conversation. If we zoomed you away, that's always a little bit of a challenge. If there's anything you want to put in the chat to just feel like you finished your sentence, or offer a word of gratitude to the people you were talking to, or whatever, feel free to use the chat in that way. Yeah, thank you for the conversations that you had in your small groups. And David and I are now going to have a little bit of a exchange, and we would really welcome having some of your questions and thoughts and ideas as part of that conversation. And the best way we've found to do that is for you to put some things in the chat. Madeline is very much attending to the chat, and she's picking up some good things and popping them into the document that that I'm working from. So feel free to put in, like, if you have a question that you didn't get to, or a storyline that you thought was so good and wanted to, have some discussion about and didn't get to in your breakout room, go ahead and put those in the chat. We're paying attention, and we'll see if we can weave those into my conversation with David. I have a couple things I want to talk to David about, and the first one is whether this book should be considered climate fiction. So we included it as part of our fiction book club, and the BTS Center is all about spiritual leadership in a climate changed world. So it kind of means we're considering it fiction for a climate changed world, but I highly doubt it's categorized as like cli-fi in any of the spaces where they do that kind of categorizing. So what do you think? Can we consider this climate fiction?
I'm a total yes. Not only I agree it's not directly a story that deals with the impacts of climate changing, right? Though, because of who we are, we're reading it with that lens, and we're always looking at what's included and also what's not included, which is the real fun of every storyteller gets to choose. And we bring that automatically because this is the time we're living. It's unavoidable, so I really feel like everything and what he did. How about ecological fiction? Because
nice,
bringing not only the natural world, but this place to life for us all so beautiful.
Yeah, that's probably the better category, right? Is ecological fiction, and maybe that's what the BTS Center is most interested in. I don't know. Well, we'll be engaging in ecological fiction. I know I was so captivated by the concept of we asked you all, one of the topics you could discuss in your small groups was around time and the way in which time functioned as a character, and just the constancy of change was certainly a part of that. And you may not have read all the way to the end, but an ending character reflects on succession. And in the natural world, succession is something that is happening all the time. There's a disturbance, and then the grasses come in, and then shrubs follow the grasses, and then there's pollinators and seed dispersers, and then pioneer species that are coming in with those shrubs, and then slowly things will turn into more mature forests. Or this is how some of it works in Maine anyway, whereas I've learned about some of the succession. But succession is something that is happening all the time in big and small ways, and often we can see it in our lifetimes. We can see a landscape potentially change from a grass field to berry bushes. David, how did this play out for you in the reading, this sense of succession and change?
Mm-hmm. Mm. It was so people focused, the stories, right? It was really about the people, and they're in this, the orchard itself became the center of the center, that just everything, it seemed, before and after came, was very significant. And it would share that. I mean, I think it was subtle how a succession was handled. Like he shared differences in the landscape through the people's eyes of what they were encountering when they were walking the forest, when they were living there. But it was
I don't think I realized it was about succession until the very end, when she referenced she's someone who studies succession. And then I was like, oh, maybe this whole thing was about succession. It was subtle.
Yeah, I think I heard him in the interview that he went to the Harvard Forest at Petersham, which is an incredible series of dioramas, very beautifully done, of one piece of land and the changes for like the past 300 years, from the forests to when they were cleared. And so like here, like sheep appeared, and it was like, it went from the forest land to the pasture, and how like we saw a succession happening, but subtle. Very subtle.
Yeah. I'm seeing in the chat, Wendy pulled a quote, and a quote in the book says, she has found that the only way to understand the world as something other than a tale of loss is to see it as a tale of change.
Yes.
Thank
That's
you.
great. I found that also. And it's actually in contrast to the original quote, because the fire is an experience of loss. And I think the loss is unavoidable. And I would hold that maybe they're in both of our pockets, if you will. Like it's both. We have the experience of loss, and it's bigger too, and change is happening. And there's always loss. I mean, there's always apocalypse, and there's always regenesis too.
I think this speaks to the role of spiritual leaders in times where we could be reading all the signs and just saying, whoa, this is all loss here. I think spiritual leaders and storytellers have this amazing possibility of figuring out a way to put a different layer of meaning on what we're experiencing, through preaching, through writing, through ritual, and through storytelling.
Yes. And may I add a little bit to that? I would say you're absolutely right. It's critical that we bring attention in our religious communities, and would say, part of my work is as a grief counselor.
Yeah.
And so I'm very connected with like the Book of Lamentations, right? And Walter Brueggemann has exploring, Lamentations in the sense, one of his books is called Reality, Grief, Hope. And he actually follows the prophets, naming what's happening, having space for lamenting. And he encourages, how do we bring lamentation back? So I know like BTS does, eco-lament. Like what?
Yeah.
Like how do we acknowledge the lament and not get stuck there? Right?
Yep.
How do we build our resilience and strengthen our moral courage in these times?
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful. Okay. So Daniel Mason is a psychiatrist, which is like a very interesting identity that he holds that actually I didn't really kind of come to appreciate until I was really far into the book. David and I just realized that the last sentence of his bio on Goodreads says that Daniel is an assistant professor in the Stanford University Department of Psychiatry. His research and teaching interests include the subjective experience of mental illness and the influence of literature, history, and culture on the practice of medicine. Which I think it's so interesting that that's who wrote this book. I mean, this was not written by a historian. This was written by a psychiatrist. There has been some activity in the chat wondering around kind of mental health, mental illness, and the natural world, and how all of that is woven in and out of this, and the supernatural, and is that real or is it not real, and should it get you put in a mental hospital or not, or I don't know. How did you read, how do you understand the identity of the author as being a psychiatrist?
Amazing. I guessed that actually before reading that, because the detail of these characters, of both for the first the Johnny Appleseed of the story, it was Charles Osgood. He saw a psychiatrist, and then later on Robert also saw a psychiatrist. And other people did not see one, but maybe they would have in other circumstances. They could have, right?
The twins maybe could have been helped by some therapy, maybe.
And what I particularly loved was, he painted them as negative people, like keep them far away from me, please. But he also shared how important our relationships with the natural world are, how significant the experience of a certain glade in the forest. Like, the heartache when one of the daughters wanted to get the sheep, the other daughters said no, and they waited, and then there was a big drought or a famine, or the crops failed, and then they expanded and they went to the other daughter's favorite place, that she just grew up, like her imagination went wild and her love affairs in her mind were happened there. Like it was like heartbreaking, but how significant. And throughout the story, people have like the walking was so important, the painting of the
Yeah,
place.
yes, that's so many spots.
Health, to health and wholeness
Right,
in a way
right.
that's not portrayed or even mentioned so much of the time.
Well, and again, this story for me is so amazing because none of that was kind of said out loud. It was all kind of implicit and under the surface in these stories, which is why I love fiction.
Yes. Me too.
Madeline, I'm actually going to invite you to unmute. You've been tracking a little bit in the chat. I'm going to add a spotlight for you here. That comments around limited vision. It's coming up in the chat. So do you want to just share a little of what you've been seeing and share that in a way that David and I can hear it?
Yes, of course. Thank you so much. Just seeing, maybe this is the constellation in my own mind, but questions and comments around like how far can we see and like
Mm.
who can see the vast amounts of change. Or I saw someone pull out like, what do those illustrations mean? And someone comment back, like, I think it means like we can see parts of the whole. And so what is like how does this big vision work and who has access to it? And I know Robert's been lifted a couple times as someone who had wide vision, and how are characters with wide vision, prophetic vision, I would even add, treated. So I think that's what I'll say about that.
Mm. Thank you so much for popping in.
I love that because I was a little frustrated by the boundaries on the pictures. I wanted to see more, like there were the two legs and the catamount, the mountain lion head, but it's just I wanted more, and it's like that's a limited vision. It's like every portrait is limited.
So interested. And of course, related then to how we go through our lives in any particular place. I mean, this book, clearly mortality and the possibility of something after is like so present in this story. But we just go through with such a limited vision on the bigger picture. Yeah, actually, I read on my Kindle and I don't know if I didn't get to see the illustrations or I just went by them way too quickly, but you also referenced a 3-page footnote that I didn't know about. So, whoa.
Remarkable footnotes.
Amazing. Well, I'll need to get the physical book now and not just read on my Kindle. I don't know if anyone else is feeling like, ooh, maybe I need to read this book again, but I am leaving this conversation feeling like I might need to read this again.
Yes, the footnote just was everything that made up the ballast in a ship that came and then sunk or something, but yet there's seeds that were part of, I don't know, dozens and hundreds of other things, but they survived. And those seeds then came onto our shore, and all of a sudden, right, it was just like this, again, what we normally don't see or think about, this ecological connection of the movement of seeds in such in a footnote, right? Which is kind of like the ballast of a ship in a way of how they pack it, and just amazing. Really, yeah.
It makes me think of I spent a dozen years living in Philadelphia in the historic part of it, and we lived in a home that was over 200 years old. And I often thought of like, who was here before me? I have no way of knowing other than kind of imagining them. And we would walk over cobblestone streets all the time, and that cobblestone was ballast from ships that were coming out of the port of Philadelphia. So, I mean, wherever they were coming from, they dumped all those rocks on the ground, and then they made our streets. And gosh, just thinking about the species that came in and out from what now looks like cobblestone, really fascinating. Okay, final thing, David. I just, the BTS Center is about spiritual leadership in a climate changed world. So like we've kind of touched on this a little bit in and out, but like what does this story evoke for you as a spiritual leader, as a, someone that's tending grief and accompanying people, and a storyteller, a spiritual, what does this evoke for you as a spiritual leader, and what's needed in these times from spiritual leaders?
Mm. What's Well, for me, just very moved by the breadth of the
Mm.
story and the passion of the people's lives, that it's centered around people's lives. And there are some that say we don't need people and we're a wound and the planet, and yet we're here. And I think we're not just that. And with uh, uh, guidance, with room for contemplation, with education, we can realize we also make a critical difference.
Yeah.
Lives, right, with each other and with the places where we live. That we are full participants,
Mm. Mm.
full participants here, even though we don't realize it. And I feel like the spiritual journey for me is, how do I deepen with just knowing that, going from the objective, being an outsider, alienated from the world, versus really at home, and trusting that, and knowing that we have impact with all of the small actions and conversations, but that's real. It's not nothing.
Yeah, I love it. That's a great place to land. David, I'm so glad you said yes to this invitation to be conversation partner on this particular book, bringing your identity as someone who's part of the Jewish community, bringing your identity as someone who lives in Western Massachusetts, and just your beautiful sensibilities about the natural world and what it might teach us in these times. So thank you. Thank you.
May I share, like, for one more minute of just to
You
say,
may.
so the picture on the cover is a catamount, a mountain lion. And that's our favorite walking spot, is the Catamount Hill, right over in Coleraine.
Oh, cool.
And so really connected. And super briefly, the rabbis in their mythic grandeur, just to say, there are many, many stories.
Mm.
Like, there's someone who calls it ancient postmodern literature, because it's diverse. There's so many voices. And there are some of these great mythological stories. And one is like the foundation stone for the world. Where is that? It's the center of Jerusalem. It's where the ancient temple was built. And underneath it are the 4 rivers that flow from Eden. Underneath it. And those rivers flow, and they're like circuitry or arteries throughout the whole world. Underground rivers connecting the whole world back to that place. And the magic of it is that it's such living powers that the wooden columns of the temple, sprouted vines and flowers, because it was tapped into that underground rivers. And that fruit from around the world could grow there at the temple courtyard, meaning like kiwi from New Zealand, star fruit from India, and apples from Coleraine right here. And they could all grow there, long as their tree was planted over that stream that connected up to this part of the world.
So cool.
And just to say, they say King Solomon, what was his favorite?
What?
The apples from Coleraine. And then when they edited those first stories, was it a kiwi there in the Garden of Eden? Was it a star fruit? No, what was it? An apple.
Amazing.
So the mania goes way back.
All right. Everyone should eat an apple today if you have the opportunity. Thank you so much, David. Madeline, could you help us close today?
Oh, yeah. Oh my gosh, what a treat this has been. Thank you so much, Nicole and David, and to each of you. Yeah, so fun. So I feel my heart feels bigger, and so does my brain, which is always a good thing. I do want to invite you, if you haven't gotten enough, to our next session, which is on July 23rd, where we'll be exploring Future Home of the Living God by Louise Erdrich, which has one of my favorite haunting book passages of all time in it. So give it a read. Very different from this, but we'll have fun. Also, we're developing, this is cool, discussion guides for each of the 3 books we'll be reading and engaging with this summer, because we hope that some of you might want to bring Northwoods or Future Home of the Living God or Cloud Cuckoo Land, which is our last book, to your own neighborhood book club, your congregation, or your community. And these discussion guides will hopefully make that extra doable for you. So I'm going to pop in the chat our link for drum roll please, Convocation 2024. This is our big event on the horizon. Convocation, it's the BTS Center's annual legacy event. This year's focus is hope in small places, becoming people of refugee faith, with keynote speakers Deborah Rienstra, who, oh my gosh, we're such lucky ducks to have her, as well as Reverend Mariama White-Hammond, who is just such a powerhouse, along with creative and contemplative immersion opportunities, Lectio Terra Bible study in affinity groups, and much, much more. So please do consider joining us in person in Hollowell, Maine, or online. We have a great, robust online companion coming your way too. And you can learn more about that and register at the link I just shared in the chat. So with that, all of that download, Nicole and David and I all hope that you go in peace as inspired fiction readers. And thank you and blessings, my friends.